On the trapeze this week, our senior fellow from the Manhattan Institute, Judge Glock, and senior fellow from the Ethics and Public Policy Center, Henry Olsen. Welcome, gentlemen, both to you to the show. And let's start right out with you, Henry. Do you think the Trump administration's tariff policy holds up legally?
No, I don't. I think he's trying to do too much on too little congressional authority, and I would expect the Supreme Court to strike down his invocation of tariffs using the IEPA, which covers the vast majority of what he's done.
But didn't Congress cede a lot of its Article I authority on tariffs to the president, giving him a lot of flexibility?
They have not done so explicitly, and that's going to be the main question, is that there are acts under which they have explicitly given the president tariff authority, and he has invoked those, but those are sector specific, like for steel or aluminum. The broad nation-based tariffs, they have not done that specifically, and I would expect the conservative majority, joined by the three liberals on the court, to rule that he has exceeded his constitutional authority in the lack of that explicit congressional authorization.
Judge, does the current policy on tariff bypass Congress authority?
I think so. Just as Henry said, Congress has given the president a fair amount of authority to impose tariffs in different laws. But President Trump in this administration chose not to use those other laws. He used this very expansive International Emergency Economic Powers Act. And that did not allow him to impose tariffs. No president before Trump in this administration has ever used it to impose tariffs. And yes, most likely the high court will do what other courts have done and strike down those most expansive tariffs Trump has used.
Well, Judge, let's take a step back then. Let's look at the bigger picture. How should the office of the presidency use tariffs? They have some authority from Congress. How should they use it?
Absolutely. For over 100 years, Congress has given the president the authority to impose tariffs if other countries discriminate against the U.S., if they're dumping products in the U.S., if there's a national security purpose, or so forth. But each of those acts gives pretty clear, limited reasons for imposing tariffs and procedures with which to impose them. That's how these kind of executive administration tariff policies should be used. They should be used like other aspects of the American regulatory state, and ideally used in a very limited fashion. For years, conservatives have warned about the executive having excessive power over private actors, over the economy. And here in this administration, we're seeing a very clear demonstration of that. The president going far too far and imposing costs on the American public without congressional say-so.
Henry, what's your take?
Yeah, I think that the president doesn't have the authority, as I mentioned, but I think that what Congress should do is when it convenes, have a second reconciliation bill that provides for a lot of what the president has already imposed, that they should do legally what he has done, perhaps extra constitutionally, and have broad 10, 15% tariffs that are imposed against most of the world.
So, talking about Congress, should they be more involved in this process? And if so, how, Henry?
Yeah, absolutely, they should be more involved. It's very clear that both from the text and from the background of the text of the Constitution, that the founders intended for Congress, and particularly the House of Representatives, to have the primary say in raising revenue, and tariffs at the time were the primary way of raising revenue. Congress should decide, does it want tariffs, and if so, against whom and for what? Before the 1930s, that's what every Congress did, and I think President Trump has put that back on the agenda, and I think they should rise to the challenge.
Judge, isn't part of the argument against what Henry's saying is that Congress doesn't act quickly enough, and therefore they had to cede power to the president because things move much faster these days. Trade policies can change overnight. A crisis can happen with shipping overnight. I mean, look at COVID, for example. I mean, should Congress have more power? And if so, what should that power look like?
Yes, well, speed can be both an advantage and disadvantage in tariff policy. So on one level, Congress has given the president some authority to respond immediately to tariffs from other countries, to national security issues, and so forth. What Congress has not done is give the president indefinite and expansive power to impose tariffs whenever he likes, because precisely those are the sort of areas where speed can be a detriment. If people are thinking about investing in the United States, providing, say, tens of billions of dollars for a new car factory, a new pharmaceutical manufacturer, or so forth, a tariff that can be removed in one day and reimposed in the next day is exactly the sort of thing you don't want to have. So speed is necessary when responding to particular countries or economic emergencies, but for long-term tariff planning, you definitely want Congress to be involved. Otherwise, the private sector doesn't know how to respond and can't respond.
You know, at the inception of our country, Judge, we had no income tax, and tariffs were the main source of revenue. Once income tax came online, is there really a need anymore for the tariffs at all? I mean, should we abolish tariffs and just rely on our revenue system that we generate from taxes, which we all pay so much of these days?
Well, some amount of tariffs certainly can be justified. You do want tariffs when there are those issues of rebasing certain kinds of national security industries or so forth. You want tariffs that can be imposed on other countries to help negotiate, as Trump has done in the past and did in the first administration. You do not want tariffs as a major revenue source. Before this administration, there were only about 2.5% of federal revenue, very tiny. It's not a major way to raise revenue for the U.S. government, and it can be very damaging for the economy. We know about half of all imports go into other manufacturing processes, and we don't want to kneecap manufacturing by putting high taxes on exactly what we need to build.
Henry, what's your take?
Yeah, tariffs cannot supply the needs of the modern welfare state. That when tariffs were the main revenue-raising feature of the government was really quite small, 1, 2, 3% of GDP. You know, we spend twice as much or 3 times as much of that on Social Security alone. But tariffs do have a role to play in determining economic policy, and given the offshoring of American jobs, given the difficulty that we would have in actually waging a long war against China, given how many of our important capacities have left the American shores, I think tariffs are absolutely important to bring those back. And they happen to raise a substantial amount of revenue that can help close the budget deficit. We just can't rely on it to fund the federal government anymore.
So what would the path look like, Henry? What's a good example of what you're talking about?
You know, I think that if we had, a baseline 15% tariff on the rest of the world with some specific tariffs imposed on certain sectors or national security risks like China that would be above that, that would provide the long-term incentive for private sector businesses to reinvest in the United States, and would probably raise 2% or so of GDP, which is enough to close 20 or 30% of the current budget deficit. I think the twin benefits of that justify the congressional institution of a broad-based moderate range tariff, which gives private sector the predictability that it needs and gives us the budgetary and the national security interest advantages that tariffs can bring.
Okay, what's your take on that, Judge?
Well, I think unfortunately, if we did impose a tariff rate in the range of 10 to 15%, we would become one of the most restrictive trading nations on earth, which is something we absolutely don't want right now, especially when we're trying to assemble an international coalition against our foes, such as China and Russia. Imposing limited tariffs on our opponents, on people in countries with which we have national security concerns, makes perfect sense. But in the Cold War, one of the main reasons the U.S. became an international vanguard of a free trading regime is precisely because we knew we needed to counteract the Soviets, who were trying to establish their own economic sphere of interest. Now, right now, if we impose 10 to 15% tariffs on Europe, on Canada, on Mexico, on our closest allies in the East Pacific as well, such as Taiwan and Japan, we're going to alienate the exact sort of people we want to help counteract China. We can put tariffs on China and our opponents, not on our closest allies.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for a robust discussion.